Ethan Walker, a self-made black billionaire, thought he had achieved everything: success, power, and wealth. But when a forgotten journal surfaces, leading him down a path of hidden family secrets dating back to the Civil War, everything he thought he knew about his legacy begins to unravel. What he uncovers doesn't just shake his empire, it threatens to change the course of his life and history itself. As he digs deeper, the stakes rise, pulling him into a world of betrayal, rivalry, and justice long overdue. Before we jump into Ethan's unforgettable journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for more powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive. Ethan Walker stood before the expansive glass windows of his high-rise office, gazing out over the sprawling cityscape. The view was one he had admired many times before, buildings rising like towers of innovation and industry, some of them even his own. Walker Innovations was the beating heart of the tech world, a company that had redefined artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Yet, in the middle of his professional triumph, there was a hollow feeling inside him. Despite his unimaginable success, Ethan couldn't shake the persistent nagging sense that something was missing. It wasn't just about business, it was about family, legacy. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was his assistant, reminding him of an upcoming meeting with the board. But instead of heading to the conference room, Ethan found himself leaving the office. He needed to get away, if only for a moment, to clear his head. Instinctively, his car took him not to a penthouse or some swanky resort, but to the Walker family estate, the ancestral home where his grandmother, Clara, still lived. It had been months since Ethan had last visited, but Clara welcomed him with her usual warmth. She was in her 80s now, still sharp and dignified despite the toll of age. Her eyes always seemed to hide a wealth of untold stories she had only ever shared in cryptic fragments. "Something's been bothering you, hasn't it, Ethan?" Clara's voice broke the quiet of the old manor's sitting room, where Ethan sat lost in thought. He smiled at her uncanny ability to read him, but he didn't know how to respond. Clara rose slowly and gestured to the attic. "If you're looking for answers about our family, you might want to start up there." Ethan didn't hesitate. In the attic, he found himself surrounded by boxes of old photographs, forgotten heirlooms, and the remnants of lives long past. His eyes scanned the room, but nothing seemed to jump out, until he noticed an old chest tucked in the corner, covered in dust. The chest was heavy, worn with age, but the lock had long since rusted away. When he pried it open, there it was, an old leather journal, the edges frayed and the pages yellowed with time. The initials were engraved on the cover. Ethan's heart raced. Those were his great-great-grandfather's initials, Jeremiah Walker. He had heard the name growing up, but it had always been accompanied by silence, as if the man's life was a story no one dared to tell. Sitting cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, Ethan began to read. What he found inside was more than he could have ever imagined. The journal spoke of a hidden life, one filled with peril and intrigue, far beyond what he had been told. Jeremiah Walker had been a former slave who had risen to prominence during the Civil War. His writings detailed secret missions, alliances with abolitionists, and the fight for freedom. But there was something more. A cryptic reference to a hidden treasure, something meant to empower freed slaves and their descendants. Ethan's hands trembled as he turned the pages, absorbing the gravity of his ancestors' words. The journal ended abruptly with a chilling message. "I leave this not as a record, but as a warning. What was once ours may never be reclaimed, not unless the sins of our enemies are laid bare." What had happened to Jeremiah? What was the treasure he had spoken of? And who were these enemies? Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. His ancestors' story had been buried for a reason. But what was it? And why now, over a century later, did it feel like he was being drawn into something far more dangerous than a simple family history lesson? The attic felt smaller as the gravity of what Ethan had uncovered sank in. His mind raced with questions. Clara's cryptic demeanor over the years now made sense. She had known something. But how much? He wasted no time returning downstairs, journal in hand, and found his grandmother waiting in the sitting room, staring into the fire. For a long moment, she didn't acknowledge his presence, but when she finally turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "You found it," Clara said softly, her eyes lingering on the journal in his hands. Ethan nodded. "You knew, didn't you? About Jeremiah, about the treasure." Clara sighed deeply, the weight of years etched on her face. "There are things I had hoped you would never have to uncover, Ethan. This isn't just about family heirlooms or long-lost fortunes. What you've stumbled upon is a legacy of blood, betrayal, and secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried." Ethan sat down, his pulse still racing. "What kind of secrets?" Clara shook her head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. You need someone who can help you understand it all. Someone who knows our history, the good and the bad. Dr. Benjamin Lewis. He's one of the country's foremost historians on African American history. He'll be able to help you." "But Ethan," Clara's voice grew tense, "be careful. Once you start pulling at these threads, you might not like what unravels." The next morning, Ethan was on a flight to Washington, D.C. Dr. Benjamin Lewis was exactly the kind of expert Ethan needed, a man who had spent his life piecing together the forgotten and suppressed narratives of African American history. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the hidden players who had shaped the future of the country. Ethan sat across from Dr. Lewis in his office, the journal open between them. The historian's brow furrowed as he read Jeremiah Walker's entries. "This is extraordinary," Lewis murmured. "Your ancestor wasn't just a freed slave. He was part of an underground resistance, one that worked tirelessly to support the freed slaves after the war. But this reference to a treasure." Lewis's voice trailed off, his fingers gently tracing the faded ink on the page. "I need to know what happened to him," Ethan said, his voice filled with urgency. "And I need to know what this treasure is." Lewis leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. There were many treasures after the war. Not all of them were gold or jewels. Sometimes they were documents, proof of ownership, stolen lands, reparations owed. If your great-great-grandfather had something like that, it would have been powerful. Dangerous. Ethan's mind raced. "You think someone killed him for it?" Lewis didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the journal carefully, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "What you're dealing with here isn't just family history. If Jeremiah had what I think he did, you're about to stir up something that's been buried for generations. And there are people, powerful people, who will stop at nothing to keep that buried." A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. He had started this journey seeking answers about his family's past, but it was quickly becoming clear that the truth was far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. He had to decide whether to continue down this path, knowing it could lead to more than just revelations. It could lead to threats against everything he had built. But Ethan wasn't the type to back down. Ethan left Dr. Lewis's office with a feeling of unease, the weight of his ancestors' journal heavier than it had been before. As the evening sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., his thoughts swirled with 1,000 possibilities. The treasure Jeremiah Walker had mentioned was no ordinary inheritance. It was something far more significant. But what exactly was it? And who else knew about it? The journey to uncover the truth had only just begun, and already Ethan felt the walls closing in. But it wasn't just the mystery that made him uneasy. It was the thought that his every move might be watched. Later that night, back in his hotel room, Ethan found himself staring at the journal again. The cryptic entries, the mention of powerful enemies, all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet assemble. But something else gnawed at him. If Jeremiah's story had been buried for over a century, why had it come to light now? Why had Clara led him to the journal at this moment? His phone buzzed, a message from Rachel, his sister. She was in New York, as usual, dealing with a particularly difficult client. The life of a high-powered lawyer left little time for family, but they had always been close. Maybe she would know what to do. Ethan called her, summarizing what he had uncovered about their ancestor and the journal's warnings. Rachel, though initially skeptical, grew serious as Ethan relayed Jeremiah's cryptic words. "Ethan, you need to be careful with this," Rachel warned. "If this treasure involves anything that could expose powerful people or reveal old crimes, you're putting yourself in danger." "I know," Ethan replied, pacing the length of his hotel room, "but I can't just walk away. Jeremiah's legacy, our legacy, is tied to this. And there's more at stake here than just our family. If what Dr. Lewis suspects is true, this treasure could change everything. Reparations, land ownership, debts, this could impact generations." Rachel was silent for a moment before responding. "I'll look into the legal side of things. If this leads to a court battle, we need to be ready." Ethan felt a wave of relief. With Rachel on his side, he knew he had a capable ally. But as he hung up the phone, a sudden knock on the door jolted him out of his thoughts. He hadn't been expecting anyone. For a second, a flash of paranoia ran through him. Could it be someone connected to Jeremiah's enemies? Ethan hesitated before slowly making his way to the door and peering through the peephole. It was the hotel manager, standing nervously with a letter in his hand. Ethan opened the door, and the man handed him an envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. Odd, who even used wax seals anymore? As soon as the manager left, Ethan opened the envelope. The letter inside was typed, the words chillingly direct. "Stop digging. You don't know who you're dealing with. Walk away now, or your family will pay the price." Ethan's hands shook as he reread the letter, his mind spinning. Whoever had sent this knew what he was after. But how? And more importantly, why were they so desperate to keep him from uncovering the truth? He was no longer just chasing a forgotten legacy. He was now a target. The next day, Ethan's resolve only hardened. The threatening letter had been meant to scare him, to drive him away, but it had the opposite effect. If someone was willing to go to such lengths to keep Jeremiah's legacy hidden, that meant he was onto something far more significant than he had realized. Returning to the Walker estate, Ethan found Clara waiting for him, sitting in the old garden where she spent her afternoons. As he approached, she looked up with those familiar, knowing eyes. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, haven't you?" Clara said with a hint of both resignation and pride. Ethan sat beside her, showing her the letter. "Someone doesn't want me to dig deeper, but I need to know, Clara. What is this all really about? What aren't you telling me?" For the first time, Clara seemed genuinely hesitant, her hands wringing together as she avoided his gaze. When she finally spoke, her voice was a mixture of sorrow and guilt. "Jeremiah wasn't just fighting for freedom, Ethan. He was fighting against something much darker, a conspiracy that involved powerful families, some of whom still hold influence today. He discovered a plot to seize land from freed slaves, to erase their contributions to the war effort, and to make sure that their descendants would remain powerless. That's why the treasure is so dangerous. It's not just money or gold, it's proof. Proof that could ruin lives and destroy legacies." Ethan's breath caught. His mind raced, the implications of Clara's words swirling like a storm. If Jeremiah had proof of such a conspiracy, it could explain why his story had been buried for generations. It also explained why someone had sent that letter. They couldn't risk the truth coming to light. "Who are these people?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with frustration. "And why didn't you tell me sooner?" Clara looked at him sadly. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen to you, to our family, if you went down this path. I've lived long enough to know that some battles aren't worth fighting." "But Jeremiah thought it was worth fighting for," Ethan replied, his voice steely with conviction. "And so do I." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Then you need to be prepared, Ethan. This isn't just about your past. It's about your future. And there are people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." The next few weeks were a blur of research, meetings with Dr. Lewis, and late-night phone calls with Rachel, who had already started preparing for any potential legal battles. But even as Ethan threw himself into uncovering more about Jeremiah's life, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. It didn't take long for him to figure out who. Oliver Grant, his rival in the tech industry, had always been ruthless. But when Ethan learned that Grant had ties to the very families Jeremiah had fought against, everything clicked into place. Ethan's discovery put Oliver at risk, not just financially, but personally. The dark history of Oliver's ancestors was something that could destroy his carefully cultivated image. If the truth about Jeremiah's treasure came to light, Oliver's empire could crumble. One evening, while reviewing old documents, Ethan received a phone call from an unknown number. When he answered, it wasn't a threat on the other end. It was Oliver Grant himself. "We need to talk," Oliver said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I know what you've been digging into, and I'm telling you right now, you're going to regret it." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You're scared, aren't you, Oliver? Scared that your family's dirty laundry is about to be aired for the world to see." There was a pause, and then Oliver chuckled, low and menacing. "You think this is just about my family? You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "Walk away, Ethan, before it's too late." But Ethan wasn't backing down. "No, I'm going to see this through, no matter what you or anyone else does to try to stop me." Oliver's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Then you'd better watch your back." With that, the line went dead. Ethan sat in silence, his mind racing. Oliver's call wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. And Ethan knew that this battle would be fought not only in boardrooms and courtrooms, but in the shadows, where the past and present collided in a deadly struggle for control. The intensity of the situation grew with each passing day. Ethan's team worked tirelessly to piece together the clues left behind by Jeremiah. Late one night, Ethan and Dr. Lewis sat hunched over a collection of old letters and maps they had recovered from an archive in the South. Dr. Lewis meticulously compared the maps to modern-day property records, trying to trace the ownership of a large stretch of land that once belonged to freed slaves in the 1860s. "This is it," Dr. Lewis said, pointing to a faded map that showed parcels of land near the Mississippi River. "Jeremiah was involved in something bigger than we thought. These lands were promised to freedmen after the war, but most of them never saw a single acre. It's no coincidence that some of the wealthiest families today own this land. It was stolen." Ethan's mind spun. So the treasure isn't just money, it's land. Land that was illegally taken from freed slaves. Dr. Lewis nodded gravely. "And if you can prove it, the implications are enormous. We're talking reparations, lawsuits, potentially billions in restitution." Suddenly, everything made sense. The powerful families who had benefited from this theft, including Oliver Grant's ancestors, had everything to lose if the truth came out. The treasure Jeremiah had hidden wasn't just valuable, it was a weapon, a key to exposing an entire network of corruption that spanned generations. Ethan's phone buzzed. It was Rachel. She had just filed an injunction against one of Grant's companies, blocking their latest tech deal. They were hitting back, piece by piece, both legally and historically. But time was running out. "What's our next move?" Ethan asked, feeling the weight of everything they had uncovered. Dr. Lewis leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting with determination. "We need to find the exact location of the land Jeremiah was referring to, and we need to do it before Oliver or anyone else gets there first." The two men worked through the night, poring over documents, maps, and diaries. Ethan could feel the clock ticking, the tension mounting with every passing minute. The stakes were higher than ever, and he knew that Oliver wasn't going to sit idly by while his empire was threatened. By dawn, they had narrowed down the search to a small, rural area in Mississippi. It was remote, forgotten, and likely the hiding place of Jeremiah's treasure, if it still existed. "We have to go there," Ethan said, rubbing his tired eyes, "before Oliver or anyone else finds out what we've discovered." Dr. Lewis nodded in agreement. "But be careful, Ethan. This is no longer just an intellectual pursuit. You're stepping into dangerous territory." The next day, Ethan and Dr. Lewis boarded a private jet, heading south to Mississippi. Tension filled the cabin as they flew over vast stretches of land, knowing that the truth, whatever it was, lay hidden beneath the soil they were about to tread. As the plane descended into a small regional airport, Ethan received a text from Rachel. "Be careful. Grant's been quiet lately. Too quiet, that only added to the mounting pressure. He had expected Oliver to fight back more aggressively, but his sudden silence was unnerving. It meant that something was happening behind the scenes, something Ethan couldn't yet see. The small town near the Mississippi Delta felt worlds away from the sleek, modern tech hub Ethan usually inhabited. The air was thick with humidity, and the town itself looked like it hadn't changed much in the past century. This was the kind of place where secrets could remain buried for generations. They rented a car and drove out to the rural property they had identified on the map. The land was vast, overgrown with trees and weeds, but Ethan's heart raced as they approached an old, dilapidated farmhouse that stood at the center of the property. "This must be it," Dr. Lewis said quietly, scanning the area with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. The house creaked in the wind, its windows dark and broken, but something about it felt important. As they approached the front porch, Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with a chilling warning. "You're too late." Ethan froze. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to Dr. Lewis, showing him the message. "They know we're here," Ethan whispered, feeling the weight of the threat looming over them. "Oliver's people must have been tracking us." Dr. Lewis's face grew grim. "Then we need to hurry." They hurried inside the farmhouse, moving through the dust-filled rooms that seemed frozen in time. The floorboards creaked under their feet, and every corner felt as though it held a piece of forgotten history. Ethan's pulse quickened as they made their way to the basement, where they believed Jeremiah had hidden something important. But as they descended the narrow staircase, a noise stopped them in their tracks. Footsteps. Someone was already inside the house. Ethan and Dr. Lewis exchanged a tense glance. Whoever it was, they weren't friendly. "We have to be careful," Dr. Lewis whispered, motioning for Ethan to follow him deeper into the basement. As they crept through the darkness, the footsteps grew louder, closer. Ethan's heart raced as they reached a hidden door in the wall, a compartment that had likely been sealed for over a century. Dr. Lewis worked quickly, prying open the old door with a crowbar they had brought along. Inside was a small chest covered in dust and cobwebs. This was it, the treasure Jeremiah had left behind. But they had no time to celebrate. The footsteps were almost on top of them now. Ethan grabbed the chest, but just as they turned to flee, the basement door burst open. Two men, both dressed in dark suits, stormed down the stairs, guns drawn. Ethan's blood ran cold as he realized who they were. Hired muscle, no doubt sent by Oliver to stop them. "Drop the chest," one of the men ordered, his voice sharp and threatening. Ethan's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. But before he could react, Dr. Lewis stepped forward, his hands raised. "We don't want any trouble," Dr. Lewis said calmly. "But this chest belongs to the Walker family. You have no right to take it." The men sneered. "It doesn't matter who it belongs to. We're taking it, and if you're smart, you'll walk away while you still can." But Ethan wasn't backing down. He wasn't about to let everything they had worked for be stolen by Oliver's goons. In a split second, Ethan made his decision. He lunged toward the men, knocking the gun out of one of their hands. Dr. Lewis grabbed the chest and bolted for the stairs, while Ethan struggled with the second man, adrenaline surging through him as they fought in the cramped basement. The fight was brutal, and Ethan's muscles burned with effort. But he couldn't give up now, not when they were so close. With a final burst of strength, Ethan overpowered the man, knocking him unconscious before racing after Dr. Lewis, who had made it to the car with the chest. They sped away, tires screeching on the gravel road as the hired men lay defeated in the dust behind them. Back in the safety of their hotel, Ethan and Dr. Lewis sat in stunned silence, the small chest sitting between them. They had risked everything to retrieve it, and now they were about to uncover the truth that had been hidden for over a century. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the chest. Inside were more letters, documents, and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. As he unwrapped it, his breath caught in his throat. It was a deed to the land that had been stolen from freed slaves after the Civil War, the proof they needed to expose the conspiracy. But there was more. Among the papers was a final letter from Jeremiah, written in his old, careful script. Ethan's eyes scanned the letter, his heart pounding as he read Jeremiah's words. To my descendants, if you are reading this, then you have found the truth. This land, stolen from us, is not only our rightful inheritance, but also a symbol of the blood, sweat, and tears shed by those who fought for their freedom. I hid this treasure because I knew there would come a time when our family would be strong enough to fight for what was stolen. Use this, not for personal gain, but to honor those who came before us. The fight is not over. Ethan stared at the letter, feeling the weight of his great-great-grandfather's words. This was more than just a deed to stolen land. It was a call to action, a mandate from his ancestor to seek justice, not just for his family, but for the countless others who had been robbed of their rightful legacy. Jeremiah knew, Dr. Lewis said quietly, reading over Ethan's shoulder. He knew that someday, someone in his bloodline would rise up and take back what was theirs. Ethan felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was his moment. He had spent his entire life building a tech empire, focusing on innovation and the future. But now, he realized that his true legacy was in the past, in the untold stories of his ancestors who had fought and sacrificed for the freedom he now enjoyed. Oliver knew about this all along, Ethan said, his voice low with anger. That's why he's been trying to stop us. His family is tied to this theft. Dr. Lewis nodded grimly. And now you have the proof to expose them. Ethan stood up, determination coursing through him. I'm not going to let this get buried again. We're going to bring this to the light, no matter what it costs. But just as he finished speaking, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. We've been served. Oliver's team is coming after everything. Be ready. Ethan's jaw tightened. Oliver was making his move. The legal battle had begun. In the days that followed, the tension between Ethan and Oliver Grant reached a boiling point. Oliver's legal team filed lawsuits, challenging Ethan's right to the land, questioning the authenticity of the documents, and accusing him of fraud. The media caught wind of the story, and soon the headlines were filled with scandalous accusations, painting Ethan as a greedy billionaire trying to rewrite history for personal gain. Ethan's board of directors grew nervous. Investors started pulling out. The tech world buzzed with rumors that Ethan's empire was on the verge of collapse. But Ethan refused to back down. Rachel worked tirelessly, filing countersuits and gathering legal experts to defend the Walker family's claim to the land. But as the case grew more public, the stakes continued to rise. Oliver wasn't just fighting for his fortune. He was fighting to protect his family's dark history from being exposed. Ethan held a press conference, standing before a crowd of reporters with the chest of documents by his side. Cameras flashed as he spoke, his voice steady but filled with passion. This isn't just about land, Ethan declared, holding up Jeremiah's letter. This is about justice. My ancestor, Jeremiah Walker, fought for freedom, and his legacy was stolen. I'm here to ensure that his story and the stories of so many others are finally told. This isn't about me. It's about righting a wrong that has gone unchallenged for over a century. The media frenzy intensified, with news outlets covering every twist and turn of the unfolding legal drama. But behind the scenes, Oliver was pulling strings, using his wealth and influence to undermine Ethan at every turn. Anonymous threats arrived at Ethan's office, warning him to drop the case. His company's stock plummeted, and even some of his closest allies began to waver. But Ethan wasn't alone. Dr. Lewis continued to uncover new evidence, digging through archives and historical records to support their case. Clara, despite her age, gave an emotional interview, sharing her memories of growing up with stories of Jeremiah's struggles. Her voice, filled with wisdom and resilience, resonated with people across the nation. The tide began to turn. Public opinion slowly shifted in Ethan's favor as more people began to see the case for what it was, a fight for justice, not just for the Walker family, but for all those whose history had been erased by greed and corruption. But Oliver wasn't giving up. As the court date approached, Ethan prepared for the final confrontation. Rachel had built a strong case, but they both knew that Oliver's team would come at them with everything they had. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial, with reporters lining the halls and crowds gathered outside. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table, his heart pounding in his chest. Across the room, Oliver Grant sat smugly with his legal team, exuding confidence. The trial began, with both sides presenting their arguments. Rachel delivered a powerful opening statement, laying out the historical evidence and emphasizing the moral imperative to right the wrongs of the past. Oliver's lawyers, meanwhile, painted Ethan as an opportunist, claiming that the documents were fabricated and that the entire case was built on lies. The courtroom drama unfolded over days, with witnesses testifying and experts debating the authenticity of the documents. But the most explosive moment came when Dr. Lewis took the stand. Under Rachel's questioning, Dr. Lewis presented the historical records he had uncovered, detailing how Jeremiah Walker's land had been systematically stolen by white landowners after the Civil War. He spoke passionately about the importance of preserving African American history and how this case was about more than just one family. It was about honoring the legacy of all those who had been denied their rights. But the real bombshell came when Rachel revealed the final piece of evidence, a series of letters written by Oliver Grant's great-grandfather outlining his involvement in the scheme to steal land from freed slaves. The courtroom fell silent as Rachel handed the letters to the judge. Oliver's face turned pale as the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. "This is your family's legacy, Mr. Grant," Rachel said, her voice calm but firm. "A legacy of theft, greed, and lies. But today, we have the opportunity to set things right." The trial ended in a tense silence, with the judge taking the case under advisement. But Ethan knew that the truth was finally out. There was no going back. Weeks later, the verdict came in. The judge ruled in favor of the Walker family, recognizing Jeremiah Walker's claim to the land and exposing the Grant family's role in the historical theft. Oliver Grant was ordered to pay restitution, and the land was returned to its rightful owners. The victory was bittersweet. Ethan's company had taken a hit, and the legal battle had been exhausting. But as he stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and family, he knew that they had achieved something far more important than a business win. They had reclaimed a piece of history, one that had been buried for too long. In the weeks that followed, Ethan worked tirelessly to fulfill his great-great-grandfather's wish. He established the Jeremiah Walker Foundation, using the land and the restitution money to create scholarships and programs for underprivileged communities. His tech empire, though shaken, slowly began to recover as investors saw the impact of his commitment to social justice. Clara, who had lived to see her family's legacy restored, passed away peacefully a few months later. At her funeral, Ethan gave a moving eulogy, thanking her for being the anchor that had kept the family's history alive. As he stood at her grave, looking out over the land that had once been stolen from his ancestors, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. He had honored his family, not just through his success, but by standing up for what was right. The Walker legacy was no longer a hidden secret. It was a shining beacon of resilience, justice, and hope for the future. Now, we ask you, what do you think of Ethan and his family's story? What would you do if your family's history held a secret that could change everything? Would you have the courage to confront the past, even if it meant facing powerful enemies? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below and let your voice be part of the story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because every story deserves to be told, and you can help bring it to light. Thank you.